Don't make your grief our burden, Celine. We didn't tell you to marry a man who'd ride horses instead of building a real career. That was my mother's voice, sharp, cold, the kind that cut deeper than knives. My father didn't even glance up from his paper. He muttered, "Life is tough. You'll figure it out, everyone does." Hi everyone, my name is Celine Arlo, and if you're listening, know this. My story isn't about how I fell. It's about how I crawled, bled, and then built something so high that the ones who left me behind could only choke on the dust of my rise. I was 28 when Noah, my husband, my anchor, was gone in a blink. A storm, a horse, a fall, and then silence. That silence stretched into nights where my twins cried until their voices cracked, and I whispered lullabies through tears they would never remember. I asked my parents for help, a nap, a meal, a ride. What I got was mockery. A lecture on my bad choices. A suggestion that maybe I should hand one twin over to Noah's family for a while to lighten the load. They laughed. My body froze. My heart didn't. So I packed a backpack, formula, diapers, a bottle warmer that sparked when I plugged it in. I pressed Cole to my chest, fastened Junior into her carrier, and walked out of the house where I had once thought unconditional love lived. The wind outside was cold, but it was honest. My car door groaned as I opened it, and on the passenger seat was a flyer from Noah's parents, dinner at the ranch. No pressure. Just family. I stared at the words until they blurred. Behind me, my parents' porch light flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw my mother's silhouette at the window, watching, unblinking. But she didn't open the door. She didn't call me back. So I drove. Headlights slicing through the dark, babies breathing soft against me, the world narrowing to one gravel road that led to the Hawthorne Ranch. And in that drive, with every mile pulling me further from rejection, I felt something shift, the faintest whisper of strength, rising, steady as hoofbeats in the night. The Hawthorne Ranch didn't look like salvation. It looked like weathered wooden fields too wide for my eyes to hold. But as I pulled up, the porch light glowed warm against the night, steady as if it had been waiting just for me. Ruth, Noah's mother, opened the door before I even knocked. Her hands trembled when she saw the twins, but her voice was steady. "Come inside, Celine. It's cold out here." Daniel, her husband, took the diaper bag off my shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. No questions. No judgment. Just room. Inside, the air smelled of hay, cinnamon, and something softer, like belonging. The kitchen table was set for 3, not 2. A high chair sat tucked against the counter. My throat tightened. They had prepared as if they knew I'd come, even if I hadn't. I kept waiting for pity. But what I found was a plan. A whiteboard leaned against the fridge. On it, in Daniel's careful handwriting. Bottle duty, Dan, 2 a.m. Laundry, Ruth, morning. Nap coverage, both. I stared, speechless. Ruth touched my arm, her eyes brimming but not spilling. "You're not alone. Not here." I wanted to argue, to remind her I wasn't her child, that this wasn't her responsibility. But Cole whimpered, and before I could move, Daniel was already rocking him gently, humming low like the earth itself had lent him its voice. That night, for the first time since Noah's accident, I slept for 3 uninterrupted hours. I woke to Ruth's humming, Junior cradled in her arms, a bottle half empty. She looked at me and said, "He'd want us to be strong together." The ranch creaked with morning as the sun broke through the blinds, painting the room in quiet gold. I pressed my hand against the wooden wall and whispered to myself, "This is where the ashes begin to turn into fire." Because betrayal had carved me hollow. But here, in the house my parents mocked, I felt the first stirrings of something they never gave me. A family not bound by blood, but by choice. And I swore, beneath that rising sun, that I would make this place more than a refuge. I would make it an empire. The first weeks on the ranch were hard. Not because Ruth and Daniel weren't supportive, they were. But because grief is a parasite. It chewed on my energy, whispered doubts into my ears, and made me wonder if I'd ever be more than the widow with twins who leaned too heavily on others. Yet every dawn, I rose. The twins strapped against me, I fed horses with Daniel. Their massive bodies pressed warm breath into the cold air, steam curling like ghosts of prayers. I'd never worked with animals before, but Noah had loved them. His saddle still hung in the tack room, leather cracked but steady. I touched it one morning, and the wood beneath my feet felt like a vow. Don't think of it as chores, Daniel told me. Think of it as rebuilding muscle you didn't know you had. His words weren't just about hay bales and bridles. I knew that. Ruth, meanwhile, became my anchor in the house. She taught me to cook meals in bulk, to keep the twins on a rhythm. She stitched tiny name tags into their blankets, Junior's in soft purple thread, Cole's in steady blue. Even in chaos, she said, they'll know where they belong. Nights were the hardest. When the twins finally slept, I sat on the porch, staring into fields silvered by moonlight. My parents' words echoed, "Don't make your grief our problem," over and over. And I realized that their refusal wasn't just neglect, it was rejection. They had chosen to exile me from the very idea of family. And that exile became fuel. I started reading everything I could about ranch management, breeding, horse training. Daniel let me shadow him, and soon I was cataloging expenses, pitching ideas, and suggesting efficiencies. When Ruth laughed at my spreadsheets, it wasn't mocking, it was proud. "Celine," she said one evening, her hand over mine, "you're not surviving anymore. You're building." That night, I kissed my twins' foreheads, whispering a promise into the curls above their ears. "One day, you'll run through these fields not as orphans, not as burdens, but as heirs to something stronger than blood. To something we made, together." The fire inside me wasn't steady yet, but it was there. And with every sunrise, it grew brighter. Because what my parents abandoned, I would turn into a kingdom. And one day, when they came back knocking, I'd be ready. The years that followed sharpened me. What began as survival turned into ambition. By the time the twins were 5, the ranch had doubled its herd. By 8, we were supplying thoroughbreds to racing stables across 3 states. Every deal, every handshake, every sleepless night stacked like bricks against the wall of betrayal my parents had left me with. I learned to ride, not just in the way Noah once did, wild and free, but as a strategist. I studied bloodlines, learned the language of speed and stamina, and whispered promises into the ears of mares carrying the future. I was no longer the widow who had stumbled into shelter. I was becoming the architect of something far greater. The twins thrived under Ruth and Daniel's love. Junior grew fearless, climbing fences barefoot, her hair flying like a banner of rebellion. Cole, quieter, would sit with Daniel for hours, sketching horses with uncanny precision. They didn't just live here, they belonged here. And not once did Ruth or Daniel treat them like burdens. They were grandchildren, in every way that mattered. But success is noisy. It echoes far beyond the fences you build. And whispers of our growing empire drifted back to the people who had once closed their doors. One afternoon, as I signed papers finalizing a new partnership with a breeder in Kentucky, I received a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable, my mother's. The words inside, though, were a stranger's. "Celine, it's been too long. We've heard of your success. Your father and I would love to visit, to reconnect. Family should be together, after all." Family. The word curdled on the page. I read it once, then again, until the ink blurred beneath my tightening grip. My parents hadn't asked about the twins. Hadn't apologized. Hadn't acknowledged the years of silence. They saw the headlines, "Local widow turns ranch into $1 million enterprise," and smelled profit. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply folded the letter, placed it in the drawer beside Noah's old saddle, and locked it away. Because I knew. The day they stepped onto this ranch, I would give them a gift so sharp it would cut the air itself. And I would wait, patient as the horses grazing under the silver moon, for that moment to arrive. By the twins' 12th birthday, the ranch was no longer just land with horses, it was an empire. We had expanded into breeding programs, training stables, and even a line of equestrian gear that bore the hawthorn crest. Investors called. Reporters wrote. And when the ink on the contracts dried, the numbers had crossed into something almost surreal, 100 million. I remember sitting at the long oak table, the papers spread before me, Daniel at my side, Ruth clutching my hand. The lawyer smiled as though it were just another transaction, but I felt Noah's presence in the weight of the pen, in the strength of the signature. This wasn't luck. It was blood, sweat, and the ashes I refused to choke on. That very week, As if summoned by fortune's scent, my parents arrived. Their car, polished and smug, rolled through the gates like they had never abandoned me. I watched from the porch, my heart steady, my children at my side. Junior's arms folded across her chest. Cole's eyes narrowed. They had never known my parents as grandparents, only as ghosts. My mother stepped out first, her perfume thick enough to strangle the wind. "Celine," she exclaimed, spreading her arms as though distance and time could be erased with theatrics. My father followed, slower, his eyes already calculating the property, the barns, the fences. I saw it in his gaze, the hunger, not for family, but for ownership. I didn't move to embrace them. Instead, I said, calm and cool, "You came." They sat at our table that evening, their voices syrupy sweet, their words heavy with false nostalgia. "We missed you. We should never have drifted apart. Family is everything, after all." My children sat silent, unimpressed. Ruth and Daniel were polite, but their eyes carried the quiet steel of people who knew the truth. I let my parents speak. I let them weave their lies into the air like cobwebs. And then, when the plates were cleared and the silence had thickened, I slid a velvet folder across the table. "This," I said softly, "is my gift." Their eyes gleamed, ready for wealth, for inheritance, for the opening of a door they thought had been locked. My father's hands shook as he reached for it. My mother leaned forward, her lips already parting with anticipation. And in that moment, I felt it, the hush before the hoofbeats, the pause before thunder splits the sky. They thought they were about to claim victory. They had no idea the ground was about to fall beneath them. My father opened the folder with greedy hands, my mother peering over his shoulder like a vulture poised over carrion. Their smiles froze almost instantly. The papers inside weren't deeds in their name, nor checks with enough zeros to make them swoon. They were transfer documents, binding and final. To Ruth and Daniel Hawthorne, my father read aloud, voice faltering. The full rights to the ranch, the horses, the brand. His eyes darted to mine, desperate. This is everything. You're giving it all to them." My mother's face tightened, a mask cracking. "Celine, don't be absurd. They're in-laws. We're your blood. Surely you don't mean..." I leaned back in my chair, calm as the storm before rain. "You're right. They're not my blood. They're my family. When Noah died, you told me to give away one of my children because the burden was too heavy for you. Ruth and Daniel carried me when I couldn't stand. They fed my babies when I couldn't keep my eyes open. They worked beside me until this place became what it is today. So yes, everything goes to them." The silence that followed wasn't still, it vibrated. My parents' hunger, their disbelief, the sharp sting of entitlement denied. My mother's hands trembled against the tablecloth. "You'd cut us out? After all we did for you?" I almost laughed. "All you did? You locked the door in my face. You made me walk away carrying twins and grief with nothing but shame strapped to my back. Don't rewrite history now, it won't save you." Ruth reached across, her hand covering mine. Daniel sat straighter, pride in his eyes. My children watched, wide-eyed but fierce, understanding something about loyalty they'd never forget. My father slammed the folder shut, his knuckles white. "You'll regret this," he hissed. But his voice was small. Weak. Because the truth was undeniable. They hadn't been cut out, they had walked out, years ago. And I had simply locked the door behind them. The gift wasn't for Ruth and Daniel alone. It was also for my parents, the sharp, unforgettable taste of what they had thrown away. I stood, steady as stone. "Dinner's over. You know the way out." And as they rose, pale and rattled, I felt the fire inside me settle, not wild, but controlled, like a forge that had tempered me into steel. They left in silence, but silence has a sound. The crunch of gravel under tires. The slam of a car door harder than it needed to be. The screech of rubber as they sped down the ranch road, vanishing into the night they had once consigned me to. Ruth's hand lingered on my shoulder. "Are you all right, Celine?" I looked at her, the woman who had rocked my children when my body failed me, the woman who had stood beside me at every dawn when grief was too heavy to carry alone. My throat tightened, but my voice came out steady. "For the first time, I am." The twins came to me then. Junior, fierce-eyed, whispered, They don't deserve us. Cole slipped his hand into mine, silent but sure. Children shouldn't have to understand betrayal, but mine did. And perhaps that was their strength. In the days that followed, rumors swirled. My parents told anyone who would listen that I had been manipulated, that I'd turned cruel, ungrateful. But people knew better. The town had seen who raised my children. They'd seen who worked this land, who stood in the barns through winter storms. The truth was written in sweat and soil, not in gossip. I poured myself into the ranch more than ever. Expansion into international markets. A training program for young riders. A scholarship fund in Noah's name for children who had lost parents but still carried wild, impossible dreams. Every move was a brick in the monument of survival I was building, not for recognition, but for permanence. And in quiet moments, I walked the fields with Ruth and Daniel. They would protest, saying I didn't have to give them everything. That my name should remain at the top. But I only smiled. You gave me back my life when I had nothing left. This ranch isn't mine alone, it's ours. And it always will be. Under the vast stretch of stars, the horses grazing in the distance, I finally felt it. Not vengeance, not triumph, but peace. Yet I knew one last act remained. The kind that would etch the truth in stone forever, so even if my parents tried to twist the past, the world would already know. And when that moment came, I was ready. The moment came on a summer evening, beneath a sky bruised with sunset. The local press had gathered for the unveiling of the new equestrian center, our legacy, carved from years of sweat and sacrifice. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled, the air thick with anticipation. My parents showed up. Of course they did. Dressed as if walking into their own coronation, my mother in pearls, my father in a suit too polished for the dust of the ranch. They lingered at the edges of the crowd, their smiles brittle but hungry. I stepped onto the stage, the twins at my side, Ruth and Daniel just behind us. My voice carried steady, unshaken. Today isn't about money. It's not about success. It's about family, the kind that shows up when the world falls apart. When my husband died, and I was left with 2 infants and no roadmap, my parents refused to help. They turned me away. But Ruth and Daniel Hawthorne, they opened their doors, their arms, their lives. They gave me a home, and together we built something greater than survival. We built this. The crowd shifted, murmurs rising, eyes darting toward the 2 figures in the back, my parents shrinking under the weight of truth laid bare. I turned then, lifting the plaque draped in velvet. The words glimmered as the cloth fell. The Hawthorne Equestrian Center. Dedicated to Ruth and Daniel Hawthorne, for their unwavering love, loyalty, and faith. Applause broke like thunder. Ruth wept quietly, Daniel bowed his head. My twins beamed, proud in a way that carved a new definition of legacy into their hearts. And my parents? Their faces collapsed, shock, fury, humiliation swirling together. They had come expecting recognition, perhaps even a share. What they received was exile, final and absolute, delivered not with cruelty but with truth. I stepped down, kissed Ruth's cheek, and whispered, "This is yours. Always was." That night, under a sky littered with stars, I sat on the porch while the horses shifted in the fields. The twins leaned against me, Ruth and Daniel nearby, laughter threading the air. It wasn't revenge that filled me. It was something colder, sharper, but strangely lighter, justice, written not in blood, but in love chosen and honored. For once, I didn't think of my parents at all. Because this story wasn't about them. It was about us.